Captain Lyra Hale stood at the helm of the Helios, gazing at the enormous derelict ship floating in the vast expanse of space. The ancient vessel was an anomaly, its hull pockmarked by age and the harsh conditions of the void, but still remarkably intact. The scanner's blips confirmed it wasn't just any abandoned relic. It had originated from a Class 15 death world, one of the most hostile environments known to the galaxy, a place even the most resilient species dared not tread. The ship's odd trajectory had initially caught the attention of the Galactic Exploration Consortium, and Lyra's team was dispatched to investigate. This was supposed to be a routine salvage operation, pick through the debris, collect any usable data, and return to base. But as they moved closer, Lyra felt a creeping unease. The ship wasn't just ancient, it was still alive, in some sense. The low hum of its systems was faint but undeniable. Her crew, a mix of experienced humans and other species, began preparations for boarding. Among them was Lieutenant Zierlek, a Vraxi xenobiologist. The Vraxi were an inquisitive and highly intelligent species, and Zierlek's fascination with death worlds bordered on obsession. He insisted that the ship, given its origins, could hold secrets that might unlock the mysteries of these lethal environments. His eagerness was matched only by his skepticism. He doubted that any race could survive the extreme conditions of a Class 15 death world for long, especially not humans, who were considered less resilient compared to most of the galaxy's hardened species. As the Helios docked with the derelict vessel, Lyra stood at the threshold of the airlock, her breath steady despite the unease gnawing at her. The ship's exterior was marked with strange symbols, human but distorted, as if they had been altered over time. She had never seen anything like it. As the hatch opened, a faint smell of decay hit her, like something forgotten, abandoned to time. The ship's corridors stretched before them, dark and narrow with soft flickering lights hanging overhead. Lyra's team moved cautiously, weapons ready but hands trembling, unsure of what they might encounter. Dr. Torin Velis, the team's leading scientist and expert in ancient alien technology, immediately began scanning the area, his eyes drawn to the walls, which showed signs of heavy wear, scratches, gouges, and markings that suggested the ship had been inhabited. "Look at this," he called out, pointing to a set of symbols near a storage hatch. "These are human, just heavily worn, but there's something off about them." Lyra stepped forward, her boots echoing in the silence. The passageway was long, its walls lined with what appeared to be living quarters, some with crumpled beds and scattered items that looked shockingly familiar. Food rations, water containers, personal effects, and even crude attempts at homemaking filled the space. Someone had been here for a long time. The question was who, and where had they gone? The deeper they ventured, the stranger it became. It was one thing to discover that this ship had been human, but quite another to realize that it had been used. There was evidence of long-term survival here, evidence that the crew had lived aboard this vessel for an extended period. But there were no signs of death, no bodies, no remains. Just empty rooms, shadows, and a growing sense of unease. Zierlek insisted they delve deeper into the ship's core systems, which appeared to still be running despite its age. He was determined to uncover the reason why such a vessel, seemingly from a failed expedition, was still operational. He led the team toward the central control room, their footsteps muffled against the metal floors. Lyra's gut told her they were not alone. The silence felt oppressive, as though the ship itself was watching them. Every flicker of light, every creak of metal seemed amplified. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that they were explorers, not cowards. But something about the ship made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. Then, just as they reached the control room, a sudden, unsettling clank echoed from behind them. Someone, or something, had moved. The air seemed to freeze, and Lyra's hand tightened around her weapon. They weren't alone. As the team advanced deeper into the ship, an unsettling feeling gripped Captain Lyra Hale. The air, once stale, now felt unnaturally thick, as if the ship itself were alive, watching, waiting. The crew moved cautiously, weapons at the ready, scanning every shadow, every corner. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the dimly lit corridors, amplifying the eerie silence that had settled over the ship since their arrival. They had reached the control room, and Lieutenant Zierlek, the Vraxi xenobiologist, had begun interfacing with the ship's aging systems. The screens flickered and sputtered to life, revealing log entries that were decades old. The entries were cryptic, their language fragmented by time and degradation. But one phrase stood out. Human. Survivors. The implications were staggering. How could humans have survived on a Class 15 death world for so long? Zierlek's skepticism turned to disbelief. This discovery defied everything he knew about the limits of biological survival. It made no sense. Dr. Torin Velis, the ship's lead scientist, continued to sift through the ship's logs while Lyra kept watch. The further they searched, the more bizarre the findings became. In one compartment, they found what appeared to be a human-made laboratory, filled with strange biological instruments and equipment. Some of it was standard, but there were modifications to the tools, evidence that they were designed to handle extreme biological conditions. There were records of genetic modifications, adaptations to survive in the hostile, unbreathable atmosphere of the death world. What did they do to themselves? Velas muttered under his breath. He seemed horrified by the implications. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a sharp clank, a noise coming from deeper within the ship. Lyra's hand instinctively went to her weapon, her body tensing. "Did anyone else hear that?" she whispered. The rest of the team nodded, but no one spoke as they waited, listening intently. The silence stretched, the tension building as the crew's pulse quickened. Then another noise, this time unmistakable. Footsteps, heavy, purposeful, and coming toward them. A chill ran down Lyra's spine. "Stay sharp," she commanded, signaling her team to spread out. As they moved cautiously toward the source of the sound, they came upon a dimly lit hallway that led deeper into the heart of the ship. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became until the air itself seemed charged with an unnatural energy. Lyra's mind raced. The ship's logs had spoken of survivors, but were they still here? And if so, how had they managed to remain hidden? They rounded a corner, and that's when they saw them. Humans, but not the same as the ones Lyra was accustomed to. These were different. Their features were sharp, almost unnatural. Their eyes glowed faintly in the low light, and their skin had a strange sheen to it, as if they had evolved to adapt to the hostile environment of the death world. They wore tattered remnants of uniforms, but they had clearly been living in this forsaken vessel for years. The leader of the group stepped forward. She was taller than any human Lyra had ever encountered, her movements fluid but predatory. Her eyes locked with Lyra's, and there was a coldness in them, an unsettling sense of detachment. She raised her hand in a slow, deliberate motion, signaling her people to stand down. "I am Commander Elysia Voss," she said, her voice eerily calm. "We are the survivors of the Astra. We have made this ship our home." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. This was not what she had expected. She had assumed they would find survivors, perhaps a few, weak and desperate, barely clinging to life. But these humans, these things, were not desperate. They were powerful, unsettling, and far more capable than anyone had imagined. "Commander." Voss's eyes flickered with something akin to curiosity as she surveyed the crew. "You're not here to take us back to your precious civilization, are you? Because we have no intention of going anywhere. Not after all this time." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Lyra realized then that this encounter wasn't just a discovery. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. These humans were no longer the survivors of a failed mission. They had become something else entirely, something that might not be willing to coexist with the rest of the galaxy. The realization sank in. They had just uncovered a deadly ship. Yes, but what was truly terrifying was what had become of its human passengers. As the shock of their first encounter with Commander Elysia Voss and her crew faded, the true depth of the situation began to sink in. Lyra and the rest of the exploration team were no longer simply dealing with a long-lost human vessel. They were in the presence of a new breed of humanity, shaped by the brutal forces of a Class 15 death world. The survivors aboard the ship were no longer just humans. They were something more, something alien. Commander Voss welcomed the explorers to a small makeshift command center located in the heart of the ship. It was clear that the survivors had made this place their home for decades. The walls were lined with scavenged materials, some of which had been painstakingly altered or grown using bioengineered methods. There were strange, organic-looking devices scattered across the room, humming with barely contained energy. Lyra's gut tightened as she realized that these modifications were beyond anything she had ever seen, a blend of technology and biology that made her uneasy. "We've learned to adapt," Voss said, her voice calm yet filled with an unsettling edge. "You'll find nothing here that you're familiar with, nothing from the old world. This ship is our sanctuary, and we've made it our own." Lyra's mind raced as she processed the implications of her words. How had these humans managed to survive for so long on a death world, and why had they chosen to stay aboard this ship, cut off from the rest of the galaxy? There were too many questions, too many unknowns. Dr. Torin Velas, the scientist on Lyra's team, began to probe deeper into the biological and technological anomalies they had found in the ship. As he worked, he uncovered detailed research logs, many of them written in a form of human genetic notation. The logs described a series of experiments performed on the survivors after their crash on the Death World, a crash that had left the crew stranded with no hope of rescue. In their desperation, they had turned to radical means of survival, genetic modifications designed to help them withstand the planet's brutal environment. "These humans, they've altered themselves at a cellular level," Velas muttered as he scanned through the logs. "They've fused their biology with the planet itself. It's not just adaptation, it's transformation." Zirlek, the Vraxi xenobiologist, peered over Velas's shoulder. His eyes widened as he saw the complexity of the modifications. "These are no longer just humans," he said quietly. "They've become something entirely different. It's as though they've merged with the death world itself." The more they explored, the more unsettling their discoveries became. The genetic modifications were not just designed to help the survivors endure extreme conditions. They had enhanced their strength, their senses, and their longevity. Some had even developed heightened cognitive abilities, allowing them to perceive the world in ways that no normal human could. But it wasn't just biological enhancements that set these humans apart. There were signs that they had begun to embrace a new philosophy, one that viewed their transformation as a form of evolution. The ship's logs described a radical shift in ideology among the survivors. The concept of survival had transformed into something more akin to ascension. They no longer saw themselves as humans stranded on a death world. They saw themselves as the next step in humanity's evolution, a species capable of surviving where no one else could. Lyra shuddered at the thought. The survivors weren't just living on this ship. They had turned it into something sacred, a vessel of their own creation. And now, as they emerged from the shadows of their isolation, they were ready to confront the galaxy once again, but on their own terms. As the team continued to explore, they began to notice strange anomalies throughout the ship. Unexplained biological growths creeping along the walls, pulsating with a faint energy. Zirlek's voice trembled as he spoke. "It's as if the ship itself is alive, integrating with its crew's new biology." The unease that had been creeping under Lyra's skin now felt like a crushing weight. The ship wasn't just a home for the survivors. It was a living organism, entwined with their transformations. It had become a part of them, just as they had become a part of it. And that was when the full horror of their situation became clear. The ship wasn't just a remnant of the past. It was a warning. Humanity had survived by becoming something else, something that might no longer be compatible with the rest of the galaxy. And if they left this ship, what would they bring with them? Commander Voss's cryptic words echoed in Lyra's mind. "We've made this ship our home," As the crew of the Helios continued to probe deeper into the ship's secrets, they realized that what they were uncovering was far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The survivors were not just relics of a forgotten mission. They were a new force, a dangerous, evolving species that had been shaped by the unforgiving chaos of a death world, and now they were ready to leave their ship, ready to claim their place in a galaxy that would never be the same again. The longer Captain Lyra Hale and her team remained aboard the ship, the more they began to understand the true scope of what they had uncovered. The survivors, led by Commander Elysia Voss, were no longer the humans they once were. They had undergone a transformation so profound that they could no longer be classified as ordinary people. They were now a new breed, adapted to survive the horrors of a Class 15 death world, and they had come to believe that their evolution was a sign of superiority, a mark of their divine right to lead and conquer. The discovery of the ship's living, pulsating systems and the grotesque biological modifications had begun to haunt Lyra and her crew. The survivors' genetic alterations weren't just physical. There was an unsettling shift in their mentality. They spoke of ascension and enlightenment, of humanity's evolution into a higher form. It was clear that they believed their survival was a gift, one that set them apart from the rest of the galaxy. They were no longer part of the civilization Lyra had once known. They were above it. Lyra's thoughts were interrupted when Commander Voss invited her and a few members of her team to a private gathering, a meeting held in a section of the ship that had been converted into a kind of sanctuary. The room was dimly lit, its walls lined with strange organic growths that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. The air was thick with the scent of something unfamiliar, something alive. As the crew entered, they were greeted by the haunting sight of the survivors, each of them an embodiment of the transformations they had undergone. Their eyes glowed faintly, their skin had taken on a smooth, almost translucent appearance, and their movements were fluid, graceful, and unnervingly predatory. Commander Voss stood at the center of the room, her presence commanding and regal. "You are witnessing the future of humanity," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of authority. "What we have become is not just a result of adaptation, it is an ascension. We have merged with the death world, learned from it, and now we are its masters." Lyra, trying to hide her growing discomfort, took a cautious step forward. "What do you mean by ascension?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease in her chest. Voss's eyes shimmered with a strange intensity. "We are no longer bound by the weaknesses of our former selves. We have evolved beyond the limitations of your understanding. The death world's environment is harsh, deadly, but it has taught us to thrive in ways you cannot imagine. Our minds, our bodies have become something greater." Dr. Torin Velis, who had been listening closely, spoke up. "But your genetic modifications, your survival, it's more than just adaptation. You've created something new, something dangerous. How can you be sure you're still human?" Voss's gaze hardened. "We are beyond human now. We are something more. We are the next stage of evolution. Humanity has always sought to conquer its environment, to adapt and survive. We have simply taken that to its logical extreme. And now we will show the galaxy what true strength is." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Lyra felt the weight of their implications. These humans, these survivors, no longer saw themselves as part of the larger galaxy. They were preparing to leave their isolation, and their twisted vision of superiority was something the galaxy was ill-prepared for. They saw themselves as the rightful rulers, destined to reshape the universe in their image. The meeting ended with little more than empty promises and cryptic threats. As Lyra and her crew made their way back to their quarters, the tension in the ship was palpable. The survivors had made it clear that they had no intention of returning to civilization. They had built a new world aboard the ship, and they were ready to expand beyond it, to impose their vision on the galaxy. The crew of the Helios was caught in a dilemma. They had come to investigate a derelict ship, but what they had found was far beyond what they could have imagined. The survivors weren't just seeking to survive anymore, they were seeking dominance, and their newfound powers, both physical and mental, made them a terrifying force. As night fell on the ship, Lyra lay awake, her mind racing. The survivors of the Astra had changed in ways that defied all logic. They had embraced a new philosophy, a new identity, and they saw themselves as the future of humanity. But at what cost? Were they still human? Or had they crossed a line from which there was no return? The Helios team was no longer just explorers. They were witnesses to the birth of something dangerous, something that could shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. And as the survivors' plans began to unfold, Lyra knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. As the days passed aboard the ship, Captain Lyra Hale and her crew grew increasingly uneasy. What had once been a routine exploration mission had quickly devolved into something far more dangerous. The survivors aboard the ship were no longer mere relics of a forgotten mission. They were a new species entirely, transformed by the brutal forces of a Class 15 death world. And now, they were ready to emerge from the shadows of their isolation and confront the galaxy on their terms. The crew of the Helios had hoped to leave the ship to return to their civilization with their findings, but the reality of the situation became clearer with each passing moment. The survivors, led by Commander Elysia Voss, had made it abundantly clear that they had no interest in returning to the fold of the galactic community. They had evolved beyond the need for any other species. They saw themselves as the next step in humanity's progression, superior to the rest of the galaxy. The ship, once a symbol of their isolation, was now their fortress, and the survivors had become its powerful, unwavering rulers. The tension came to a head when Commander Voss invited Lyra and her senior officers to a final meeting. The atmosphere in the room was thick with hostility, the air heavy with unspoken threats. Voss stood at the center of the room, her posture straight and proud, her eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone who believed they were on the brink of something monumental. "You've seen what we've become," Voss said, her voice unwavering, "and now you see our vision. We will not return to the old ways of the galaxy. We have transcended them. We will no longer be governed by the outdated institutions and fragile systems of the past. We are humanity's future, and it's time for the galaxy to understand that." Lyra's jaw clenched as she listened. The implications were horrifying. These people, humans, had become something far more dangerous than she could have ever anticipated. Their transformation had granted them unimaginable power, not just physically, but mentally as well. They had melded with the death world in ways that gave them control over its harsh, toxic environment. It was no longer just about survival. It was about domination. "What do you intend to do?" Lyra asked, her voice steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach. "You cannot expect the galaxy to simply accept your claim to superiority. There are civilizations out there, more advanced than you can imagine. They won't stand for this." Voss's eyes narrowed, and a cold smile touched her lips. "You underestimate us, Captain Hale. We are not just survivors, we are the future. The galaxy will bend to us, or it will be crushed beneath our will. This ship was merely the beginning. We are ready to take the next step. Our evolution has only just begun." As Voss spoke, Lyra's mind raced. The survivors weren't just planning to remain hidden in their ship. They were preparing to launch a campaign to reshape the galaxy, to subjugate those they deemed inferior. And with their enhanced strength, resilience, and intellect, they were a force unlike any Lyra had ever encountered. But what truly terrified her wasn't just their power. It was their belief in their divine right to rule. They no longer saw themselves as part of the human race. They had rejected their former identities, casting off the conventions of society in favor of something more primal, more dangerous. And they had the means to make their vision a reality. The meeting ended with a chilling warning. "We are not asking for your approval," Voss said coldly. "We are telling you that the galaxy will fall under our banner, whether you like it or not. Leave now, or prepare to be swept away in the tide of our ascension." As Lyra and her crew returned to the Helios, the weight of the situation settled over them like a crushing burden. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, one that was being shaped by the survivors of a forgotten ship, a group of humans who had transcended their origins and evolved into something far more terrifying. The crew was caught in a deadly dilemma. They had learned too much to simply walk away, yet the knowledge they had uncovered was a ticking time bomb. What could they do? How could they stop a force that was no longer bound by the same rules as the rest of the galaxy? In the silence of the command deck, Lyra's thoughts were interrupted by a new transmission. It was from the Galactic Council, an emergency message requesting assistance. The Council had detected strange anomalies on the outskirts of known space. Lyra's heart sank. The survivors were making their move. They were preparing to spread their influence, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming for them. The reckoning of humanity had begun. And this time it wasn't about survival. It was about conquest. The galaxy was about to witness its most profound upheaval. Captain Lyra Hale and the Helios crew had discovered a force that had evolved beyond the boundaries of humanity. The survivors aboard the derelict ship, transformed by the deadly forces of a Class 15 death world, were no longer mere humans. They had embraced their evolution, their power, and now, with their ship as their fortress, they were preparing to extend their dominion across the galaxy. In the aftermath of their final meeting with Commander Alicia Voss and her crew, Lyra realized that the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The survivors had made it clear that they were not interested in rejoining galactic civilization. They had transcended it, and now they saw themselves as the new rulers of the universe. But Lyra's crew, armed with their knowledge of the ship and the survivors' capabilities, were determined to stop the impending onslaught, even if it meant defying their own species. The Helios crew sent a distress signal to the Galactic Council, warning them of the new threat. Lyra knew they were facing a force unlike any other, a group of humans whose physical and mental enhancements made them nearly invincible. They had adapted to the harshest environment imaginable and had transformed into a species capable of surviving where no one else could. Their belief in their divine right to rule, combined with their unparalleled power, made them a formidable threat. And as they prepared to leave their ship and expand their reach, the galaxy was completely unprepared for the consequences. Lyra and her team knew that their mission was no longer one of exploration or diplomacy. It had become a race against time to stop the survivors before they could impose their vision of supremacy on the galaxy. But even as they fought to stop the transformation of humanity, they couldn't help but feel the weight of their predicament. The survivors weren't just a threat. They were a reflection of what humanity could become if left unchecked. Ruthless, driven, and unstoppable. The Helios crew scrambled to warn neighboring systems, but it was too late. The survivors of the Astra had already begun their campaign. Their ship, once a symbol of isolation, had become the flagship of an insurrection. Its massive bioorganic engines roared to life as the survivors launched their invasion, their enhanced bodies and minds giving them an edge in every battle they fought. Civilizations across the galaxy began to fall, one by one, unable to resist the relentless onslaught. As the Helios crew raced to gather more information and strategize a defense, Lyra realized the true scale of the survivors' power. It wasn't just their genetic enhancements or their physical abilities, it was their unity, their shared belief that they were the next stage of evolution. Their arrogance and superiority were woven into every aspect of their being, and they believed that any species that stood in their way was simply destined to fall. The galaxy's once proud civilizations were crumbling. The Council's fleet, too slow to respond, was scattered, and planetary defenses were overrun. The survivors had forged an army of their own, consisting of those who had been transformed by the Death World's cruel forces. The survivors believed they were invincible, and to an extent, they were. In the final moments of the story, Lyra and her crew stand at the edge of a new era. The galaxy is falling into chaos, and the survivors of the Astra are at the forefront of a revolution that will forever change the course of history. The old order is gone, and humanity in its new form is poised to dominate the stars. But Lyra is left with a haunting realization. She and her team were mere witnesses to the rise of a new power. The survivors were no longer part of the old human race. They had become something far more dangerous, And as the galaxy teeters on the brink of total collapse, it becomes clear that the price of survival is not just the loss of civilization, it is the death of everything humanity once stood for.